We have to keep on time. The second panel, we have 5 speakers. We have one more. I apologize for that, but it's what you request in the evaluation form that we look very systematically for each of them. You want everything. You want time. You want many speakers. You want many perspectives. And you want questions. So, yes. And you want coffee. You see, my neighbor wants coffee as well. So you don't want to sacrifice coffee. So I will ask you really to be on time to come for the second panel, because we have 5 speakers coming from far, from different regions. Now we can allow some questions. I mean, if they are short, focus to some of our excellent experts, or bringing, of course, a different perspective, but very focused. If you want, please raise your hands. You have a microphone in front of you. Introduce yourself, but just name an organization and pose your question or contribution to our panelists. And please, Felix, if we have questions also from the people following us by web stream. Thank you very much, please.
Je vais parler en français.
I will speak English. I am a farmer from Campesina, and I'm a delegate to the European Economic and Social Council, and I was able to come up with an opinion on agroeconomy and short circuits. I think this is an extremely interesting conference, and from the farm to fork approach of the European Union, I think is very interesting. I think we're very optimistic here, but in the European agricultural area, a great deal needs to be done so that agroecology can actually be seen to be the way to go. And I hope the Common Agricultural Policy can really also start to look at this. And I hope DG Development will be able to take account of all the farm-to-fork thinking. So my question is, can the Common Agricultural Policy really do this? How can agroecology be taken account of in the farm-to-fork strategy?
Sir, you wanted the floor? Please, the next one. I can't see. You wanted, yes, please go on.
My name is Henri Bosma from Israel World Soil Information from Wageningen. Actually, I have a question for Mr. Frisson. Soil fertility, of course, is a major issue when you talk about food security. And I want to really ask a question in the light of the development of Africa for food security and for income. African soils are leached, weathered, not everywhere, but a lot. And my question to you is, do you see any room for use of fertilizer to kickstart the soils, to increase organic matters? Because I'm very sympathetic to the agroecological approaches in general, the factors which have been mentioned, but I'm a bit worried about the productivity of the ability of agroecological approaches to produce enough organic matter. Thank you.
S'il vous plaît.
Merci.
Thank you. I'm from the Ambassador of Burundi here in Brussels. My question is for Mr. Brisson, who made a very interesting presentation. Do you think that conversion to agroecology will be easy or even possible for governments, multinationals, because the shareholders of the multinationals are asking for more and more profit? So let me just give you an example from Burundi, my country. In the 80s, an investor convinced the government to promote tobacco production, saying that there would be job creation, tax income for the government, and also foreign currency from exports. It was very attractive, but at the end of the day, we used to produce cereals. We were the granary, if you like, and all the trees were cut down to produce tobacco. And the region where this was grown has now becoming a desert, and there are huge deficits there. So the results are quite contrary to what was promised initially.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Jan Hugo. I'm a co-founder and CEO of IPES-FOOD, which is a curiosity, experimentation, and awareness center in Brussels. So first of all, I'm really glad to see so many people gathered around such crucial topics as agroecology. I think it's a very nice first step. I won't come back on all the arguments put forward that I agree with. But I think one of the main issues is not much about discussing such issues amongst like high-level experts panels, but more about how to raise the awareness of the markets and the general public, because a lot of the speakers have mentioned the fact that we really need to put those debates amongst the general population and to involve local people. But and don't get me wrong, I think all the subjects brought to the table today were really important and interesting, but the way they were delivered might be a very huge barrier to actually capture the interest of the public and of the people who will make the change possible. So my question is how to allocate resources in order to transfer the knowledge to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are many actually organizations and partners who will do that, so we welcome if you can assist in there as well. I don't think there are more. You can, of course, pose them in the second part because it's all related. So please, I think, Emile, on the EU side, we will also have the experience of Agroecology Europe in the second panel as well, that you are aware that there is a presentation on that. Please, I think, for the Commission, Emile and anybody who want to add anything. Thank you.
Yes, just to reply to Geneviève, clearly the farm-to-fork process is a process which is across all Commission services. It's part of the Green Deal. Actually, there's a meeting at directors level tomorrow. It is steered by Sante and Agri. So Sante is also important. There is a process also. As you know, there is this idea of whether we should have or not an approach towards a more food policy approach, with all the underpinnings that Emile and colleagues mentioned. The nutrition dimension, very strong, the diversity of the diet, the links to public health, hence the DG Sante. So let's see how it will evolve. Until now, it was quite EU-centric, the farm-to-fork. Our role as external relations services is to embed the external dimension of the Green Deal and also to have a more holistic global approach. So that is also our role as DEFCO services. Again, this is a window of opportunity, and we are not sensing a degree of tensions across the services. It's more a question of how big is the appetite, and as I said earlier on in my introduction, the appetite across the EU member states on this process, in my opinion, remains quite limited. Also because there are a lot of questions, not because the evidence is not there, but the transition is not easy. It's not easy for the EU, but it's not easy for the developing world as well, because, as Emile said, there are vested interests. And to dismantle the process of vested interest across the value chain, even in the European Union context, you know that unfair trading practices took a long time within the EU, let alone in structures where governance, where input subsidies in a number of African countries are enormous. We are speaking about some countries where we are speaking about 5 to 10, even more percentage points of GDP being allocated to input subsidies. And I think this has not been discussed enough on how to transit from a dependence of unsmart subsidies because subsidies, even within the European Union context, there has been a process of 50 years of decoupling approaches towards good agricultural practices, towards a more green box approach. This will take time in Africa or the Caribbean or the Pacific. The transition will take time. And I think what was not discussed is the cost or non-cost of non-transition. You can see it as like the cost of non-Europe or the cost of Europe. What is the non-cost of a transition process? What are the nudging points? What Emil mentioned as the spots, because concentration of power. How do you disentangle the concentration of power? Not easy, not even in the EU, let alone when you have positioning of dominant players. This is also part of the discussion around the EU-Africa continental free trade area, because it's easy to say we have a continental free trade area. But how do you integrate Africa? You integrate Africa with dismantling the vested interest, but that can take decades. If you want to increase intra-regional trade from 17, 20% to 60%, you need to see where those difficult points are in the agricultural value chain, in energy markets. And I think what we are trying to do is start to dismantling those vested interests, which is not easy. We do it through a number of instruments. We have budget support, but we also now have a process of sustainable finance. We have a taxonomy of sustainable finance, because where the money will start flowing, today it doesn't easily flow to agroecology because there are no entry points on sustainable finance. How will the big fund managers look into agroecology vis-a-vis conventional? So we need to also create a taxonomy, and that's what's being done by colleagues in FISMA and other services, including ours, to create sustainable finance modes, which actually will give the right market signals, this was mentioned earlier on, to actually channel funds into agroecology, because the evidence shows that there is a return on investment. But do those products exist on agroecology? Do green bonds exist for agroecology? Not yet. Should we design? Yes, we should co-design with also financial institutions. And that is also what we are trying to do within the process of the Green Deal, where we also bring together financial institutions, FMO, AFD, other players, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti in Italy, to see whether, one, there is a market, there is a product, and then we start channeling the funds, because if there is a win-win in terms of the evidence from a productivity, from a health point of view, there should be a market, but however, we have to create those financial instruments to start targeting the investments and rigging it from a conventional point of view.
The question about soil fertility and especially bringing back organic matter and the potential of doing that, I think the first thing to say, agroecology, as was mentioned earlier, doesn't have a magic formula that is universally applicable. It will depend on the local conditions. But to take concrete examples, whether it's in Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, where agroecology initiatives have shown to be increasing productivity in the first year. I think that's quite significant, because in many cases, when we talk about a transition period, in countries where you start from very low input, applying agroecology principles and practices on the ground can give you benefits right from the first year or the first couple of years, which is more difficult in countries like Europe, where you have a lot of other barriers, including soils that have been really depleted and become almost sterile and need soil health to be rebuilt. When we start from conditions of subsistence agriculture and bringing in agroecology, we've seen really productivity increases very significant, sometimes doubling productivity or more right from the beginning. So the question of should we also have some fertilizers, I think there's no general rule. If you look at the FAO documents on agroecology, there is not something that says that you cannot use any fertilizer in there. I think we have to really look at the conditions locally. But to say that we always will have to start by putting a bit of fertilizer to kickstart, I think that's the wrong approach. It has been shown that you can really increase productivity very significantly right from the beginning by applying agroecological practices. The second question about will conversion be easy? Well, if it was that easy, probably it would have been done. And I think we highlighted already some of the obstacles that make it more difficult. But there are very concrete, again, concrete examples where it is happening. We mentioned India, where things are happening at scale. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of farmers that have made the conversion. And we must realize that a lot of the incentives that push, for example, to move to tobacco production, again, don't look at any of the externalities on the impact it has had on deforestation, on degradation of land. So it is a matter of bringing to the attention of decision makers the need for policy changes. Again, Fergus also mentioned the issue of fertilizer subsidies that continue to be pushed in many countries, where at the end of the day, the money is in the pocket of the fertilizer companies, and very little benefits go to the actual farmers. So yeah, it's not going to be easy, but I think taking the approach of looking beyond just productivity of a single commodity and yield per hectare, as has been the focus in the past, to a more comprehensive set of outcomes that matter to society, I think that's a way to really move quickly. And I think one concrete example of combating the influence of vested interest, there's been a lot of promotion of GMO technology, for example, in Uganda, where legislation was about to be put in place to allow GM technology to be deployed in the field. And at the last minute, the president, Museveni, has said, no, we don't want, not because of GM technology not being safe or not being healthy or whatever, but the reason was that we don't want to be dependent or in the hands of multinational companies that control the GM technology. And I think this is one concrete example where a political decision at a senior level can really overcome these the influence of vested interests.
You have a final word, Fergus or Alejandra, something to add very, very quickly?
Just quickly on the fertilizer issue, I think there are some really serious issues here. Not just that if you start from a very depleted state, you need a strategy to build up organic matter, but phosphorus is a critical issue connected to urbanization, that most of the phosphorus is transported away from the field. And it's fine if you've got a rock phosphate deposit somewhere nearby. If you haven't, then there are some real issues about how the recycling and so on. And this is also very much connected to livestock and integrated livestock systems, which we haven't really had a time to explore. But I think you're putting your finger on something which is really critical in terms of long-term sustainability of agriculture, which inevitably involves taking things away from a field. So and that's not something we should be shying away from at all, but we need to be finding solutions that are more sustainable than the ones that we have at the moment. And ISRIC's approaches that involve being able to look very locally at what is needed is, of course, a huge improvement on what has happened in the past, where blanket sort of applications have gone on. Just linking back to the sustainable finance comment that Leonard made, I mean, that's absolutely critical. And of course, that's where the metrics become very important, because if you're going to apply a sustainability criteria to finance, then you need to measure whether or not an investment is sustainable. And doing that in a cost-effective manner is really critical. So developing those metrics so that they can be practically applied, I think is absolutely critical. And a final comment that I would make is, and I think maybe underlying a bit the comment on the fertilizer, is it's really important that agroecology is not anti-science. It is not anti-technology. It is not anti the private sector. It's often characterized in that way, but it isn't. But as we've heard time and time again already this morning, the issue is of power asymmetry and how technology is used and controlled. Those are the issues that we need to be about, and we need to get off this sort of simplistic, knee-jerk type of reaction, which I've had a lot of difficulty with getting some of these reports through peer review because of these type of knee-jerk reactions. And we need a more mature debate that takes power asymmetry as a key issue that needs to be dealt with in agriculture and food systems, rather than something that gets, put under the carpet.
Yes, you're fine, right? Yeah. So thank you very much. We have the coffee break now. Please just take 10 minutes maximum, because you can bring the coffee in the room. Thank you very much. A big applause to all our speakers and panelists in the introductory remarks. Thank you.